Well, it's been a big couple of days in politics. Of course, the Prime Minister has now announced the date for the next election, September 14. Tonight, I'm sitting opposite one of the key players in federal politics who has spoken to the Prime Minister herself before she made that announcement. Rob Oakeshott, welcome to Time to Talk.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah, it's really long overdue. You've been on this show. We've been on air for 3 years, and it's good to have you on.
Yeah, good to be here. And for those listening, there's no... it's complete coincidence of events of the last couple of days in this conversation, but you're right, it's long overdue.
No, I prefer people to think that you rushed onto this show
okay.
because you needed to spread your message.
Yes, yeah,
So listen, I'm assuming the Prime Minister contacted you by phone, and that date that she announced is still more than 7 months away. That's what everyone's talking about. Were you as surprised as everyone else about how early this announcement was made?
Well, there's a couple of things going on at once. Firstly, there was an agreement reached at those days on the back of the 2010 election, which was to have a parliament run its full term, and that there would be an election in that September-October 2013 window. So the conversations with the Prime Minister have been quite regular since then on a whole range of topics, including those parts of the agreement. So there wasn't much of a surprise when the formal phone call came through a couple of days ago about the date itself. There's really only, when you think about that September-October window and you knock out school holidays and you knock out some footy finals.
There's always going to be around them, but to call it so soon, that's the surprise.
That's the key, and that was the surprise, and that's her call, and who knows whether events of today had anything to do with it. I hope not. This has been a particularly twitchy parliament on the politics, and if she hadn't have clarified this issue relatively early this year, can you just imagine the temperature that would have gone through the roof and the speculation merely about the date itself? So at least that's been removed from the speculation. So
it's something to do with the nature of the parliament we have currently. It sounds like what you're saying. But I'm
the politics. It shouldn't have anything to do with the parliament. It's the way the politics is being played in 2013 and the last couple of years, and the very adversarial nature of it.
Is this about forcing Abbott to reveal his policies? Is it about keeping Rudd at bay? I want to know, what's your take? What is the strategy?
Let's say the second. I don't think it's got anything to do with Kevin Rudd. I've fingers crossed hope it's got nothing to do with a certain MP facing 150 fraud charges today. And I do think it's trying to, in a year that there's going to be a lot of electioneering, grandstanding, and a lot of speculation about a lot of things, to at least remove speculation around that, to do a bit of a front foot play early, and to keep the focus as much as possible on detail. I think the Prime Minister believes if she can get in a detailed debate on any topic with Tony Abbott, she'll win. And the challenge for Tony Abbott over the next 7 months in a strategic political sense is to continue to just express values and create the aroma of policy without getting into too much detail. And I think we're going to see that game play itself out through this year, where it's a Prime Minister trying to chase an alternate Prime Minister for detailed debates and an opposition leader doing what they can to avoid them.
Now, you, Rob, yourself, you've added to the showbiz of all of this over the past few days because you're not declaring if you'll run or not at this stage. Tell us why.
Well, yeah, just trying to keep that completely separate. I work on my own timetable. I have at the last 6 elections and make announcements and really make decisions in my own mind about 6 months out. When I stand up at the start of a parliament, in fact, on election night, I'm quite genuine when I say to gathered media and supporters that the way I will pay back the honour of being elected is to work my damnedest every single day of this parliament. Now, if I spend a year of a 3-year term campaigning for the next parliament, I'm not really upholding the commitment that I've made on the previous election night.
That all sounds very sincere, but is there no...
It's true. I mean, because there's plenty to be done in this parliament.
So there's no political strategy behind holding off on your announcement? No political strategy at all?
Well, only to work to my own timetable and not be a slave to others. And that is very much the independent way. And I guess if there's any political strategy involved, it would be to make sure no one takes any candidate for granted in standing. I think some lessons learnt in previous elections locally is that a lot of people were very disappointed with certain results after the event and would have liked to have participated a lot more and would have participated a lot more if they realised those elections were as close as what they were. Okay. And I particularly mentioned the recent state election and the loss from the now Mayor Pete Beazley, where there was a bit of an outpouring of support after the event, and people shouldn't assume anything that any election's going to be easy. So
I'm going to talk
hopefully
to you about,
it'll twitch some support and let's rip.
I want to talk about that election result with you very shortly. I want to play cynic for a moment. You'll get that about me.
You're not alone.
Some people might say that holding back on your own announcement, it allows you time to read the public mood, to work out if people here in your own backyard, in your own electorate, if they're really behind you this time round. Is that part of why you're holding back?
Yeah, sure. And that's not being cynical at all. That's part of a decision-making process. Politics is a game for winners. You can only play and you can only chase results if you're going to win. So I financially and physically will really want to stand to make sure I'm not dragging a whole lot of people to the ballot box in standing out in the pouring rain potentially to lose for me to make some sort of point.
So this time that you've
but it's not the only consideration either. There's family, there's friends, there's a very obvious campaign that's coming of nearly $1 million of advertising and trying to abuse me out of office. These are all very real considerations. So you're not being cynical. You're tapping into one of many considerations that you go through.
So, by that, there's a spectrum of considerations. I'm getting that. But in a way, this time...
But I might add 2 months won't make a difference in that. I know the mood and I know what the challenges are. So the difference between now and March is minuscule. Really, it is a commitment to, I over Christmas thought this through and thought that would be a good time to do it, and any announcement that the Prime Minister makes shouldn't change that.
So it would be accurate to say you're allowing yourself an escape clause at this stage.
Why is that an escape clause? Why should you demand that I stand?
I'm not demanding that you stand at all.
Well, that's what's implied in an escape clause.
An escape clause
I've stood for this Parliament, and I'll work my hardest I can in this Parliament.
Yep.
And I may very well stand at the next Parliament, but I'm not going to let it interfere in the work of the moment. Okay. And when we're ready to go into election mode, you'll be one of many to know, and by all means, away we go.
What about your health, Rob? You've got on record to say that you do have an autoimmune disease. Will that be a factor in your decision to run or not?
No, it's not actually. It's lots of people live with far worse conditions than what I do, so it's manageable, and we're fine.
Okay. I want to talk to you about perceptions in politics. I'm always interested that people feel comfortable enough to refer to you as Rob, to be honest. Because when I talk about tonight...
Even opponents, it's fascinating.
It is. And you were coming in here tonight and I haven't met you before, and the position you hold deserves a certain amount of respect and dignity. Crossed my mind to call you Mr. Oakeshott, but it just didn't sit right. So what I want to know is...
You're the first person in 3 years to say that, so thanks for that.
Well...
Even though I'd probably feel a bit uncomfortable if you did it, but it's nice you say it.
So that's not you carefully cultivating an informal image? That wasn't your doing, this Rob sort of image that you have?
I don't think so. It's certainly not carefully cultivated. If it did, it certainly has happened unconsciously. I am who I am, and I assure you I don't have the budget to cultivate an image, and nor do I have the personality. I am who I am. I say what I think, and I think what I say, and people can take it or leave it, and sometimes it works for you and plenty of times it works against you. So I guess that makes me Rob.
When I first moved to this area, it was about 10 years ago, and I remember coming across you at a work event of some kind. I'm not sure. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know you at all. You did radiate an energy, though, and it was quite strange. I am a bit odd myself. People have different auras and energies, and about you, I could tell there was something about you. And then I was told, you're the somewhere in politics in the local area. And I thought, well, that's about right.
I'll get you to read my cards.
I know. I'm sounding mystical now. Right. I'm curious to hear how you assess your public reputation, though. What do you think the people, I'm talking about in your own electorate, what do you think the people in your own electorate think when they hear the name Rob Oakeshott?
Oh, you get a mix of views now. I think over different times over the last 15 years in public life, you'll have different emotions attached to my name and the independent way in this area. It's it's many different things to different people, and I'd add to that in private life as well. Locally, I live here, so I see plenty of people on a daily basis that you would, in your life, and I'm sure they'd perceive you just as the bloke up the road taking the kids to the school, or so it's a pretty hard one for me to answer as to how I'm perceived. But
it's important.
In the end,
though,
you're in
it?
public life. Well, in the end, you're in public life, and you can't cultivate it. In the end, you do the best you can with what you've got. My job description, I think, is to chase as many results as I can for the local area and through the parliament. And it really is as simple as that. And I know I'm human and make plenty of mistakes, and sometimes, say things or do things that in hindsight I wish I hadn't, but it's a human business. And from there, it's really a question for everyone else as to what perceptions they hang off all of that.
I'm an armchair spectator when it comes to politics. I can honestly say I don't know too much about it, but I do love the psychology of politics. I love the strategy of politics. And what I love most of all, especially as I'm growing older, is the potential of politics to do good. And I really believe politics can do good if it's wielded in the right way. I've witnessed a shift in your public image, though, and I want to put it to you, where once I felt, like I say, 10 years ago, that there was this feeling that you were the local boy done good, you were highly respected, very much seen as one of us, like you were just saying there, one of the community. And on top of that, a guy who really wanted to cut through the political crap, if you want to call it that, just get the best possible job done. And you're saying that hasn't changed. My take is that shine has faded. I'm certain you've still got support, and that's certainly what my feeling is. There's an increasing feeling, though, rightly or wrongly, that perhaps you're just another politician. Maybe you're just a slave to the political system. Some people may say a puppet of one of the major parties, one or both. It seems to depend on who you talk to. When you walk down a street in Port Macquarie, do you still feel as respected as you undoubtedly were pre-2010?
Oh, look, in all of that, I mean, I hear what you hear and see what you see. In all of that, I don't consider respect to be the same as the roller coaster of public perception. So I think in your very question, you've mixed two values and two ideals. And it's that great quote that's on the wall before Centre Court Wimbledon about treat success and loss both as the traders that they are. And it's a much better quote than that, but that's the basic sentiment. And so, when you're riding high, you shouldn't, in your own mind, think, oh, I'm enormously respected. And when you're down low, you shouldn't think, oh, I'm totally disrespected. These are the highs and lows of public life. And you just, as I said before, you just do the best you can. It's a human business. My philosophy and job description is an incredibly simple one in amongst all the white noise of politics, and that is to, with as much transparency and as much accountability as possible, to to achieve as many results for your local area and through the parliament as you possibly can. You're not going to win every fight you go into, but if you can win a few and do the best you can, then you're having a pretty good go.
I like how you say...
that can be... I'll just add, that can be perceived as just another politician, and I can't control people's perceptions. I have noticed over the last 3 years, I worry about how many people perceive politics generally in Australia, and is that the default position is to be anti-government and to be automatically anti-trust. And people tap into that and use that as a weapon against people such as myself, and I can't control it.
You talked about riding the highs and lows of politics. Well, one thing about you specifically is that you have a remarkable track record. There's no question about that. You've consistently, during elections at both state and federal levels, you've garnered these massive primary vote tallies. They're the kind of vote tallies that other politicians, they would kill for. And I want to take you through some of them because I've got them here. Look back at some of those results. In 2003, you ran in the state election and you won nearly 70% of the primary vote. That's incredible. I've lived in a lot of different areas. 70% of the primary vote, amazing. And you did practically the same in the New South Wales state election of 2007. 2008, as you know, you stood as the independent for the federal by-election, and again it was a spectacular primary vote, somewhere in the order of 63%. 2010, federal member, you stood again, you won just under 50%. It was it was smaller than what you were used to, but it was still an amazing, substantial percentage and a clear indication that you were at that stage one of the most consistently popular politicians in the whole country. Those are the figures that are the evidence that I look to say you're a popular politician. But I'll tell you what I think, and just bear with me here because I want to know what you think about this. Some people are saying that because of the events of 2010, where you became the focus of national attention, when you and two other independents needed to make a historic choice because of those events, people are saying that come the next election, your primary vote is going to take a massive hammering. And what I'm interested to hear is that if that view is correct, that's going to put you in a position that you personally have never been in your whole political career. You could end up being the federal MP of a marginal seat, for example. You could perhaps even lose. So here's my question out of all of that.
Yeah.
How does a statistically popular politician like yourself, how do you reconcile the prospect of a possible severe voter backlash? How does that sit with you? How do you reconcile it after being so popular for so long?
Oh, look, I hope I speak on behalf of all MPs and all candidates, is you wouldn't go near public life if you feared losing. It is.
You don't fear losing?
Not at all. It's an inherent part of the business you're in. It is a dangerous, risky career path to go into public life.
At school, popular people really do fear being rejected.
Yeah, but popular doesn't mean right, or popular doesn't mean genuine success in building a better community. So I guess with a bit of time, I really honour and appreciate a really strong vote. I don't deny that at all because, as I said before, this is in the raw politics, the business of winners. You have to win to represent and to really try and chase the things you want to chase for your community and through the parliament. You've got to be thick-skinned and broad-minded enough to recognise that the difference between rooster and feather duster is minimal, and therefore that can't be the motivator. The motivator's got to be engagement with people, building more resilient communities, and really chasing some important things in Parliament. And I would much rather to be respected and remembered as someone who stood on my digs on some really important issues and chased some really important results, regardless of the result at the ballot box. And ironically, from that, hopefully the vote is stronger because of the greater respect that I'm not just chasing a populist vote.
Do you believe, Rob, that if you do stand again, because that's the if you do stand again, do you believe that there will be a hit on your primary vote tally? Do you believe that's a fait accompli, given the situation you've been in? No,
it's a really interesting time. I don't know, and I don't think anyone in Australia knows, and I don't think it's only just happening here in the electorate of Lyne. I describe it as a very hairy-chested time in politics. It is from 2010. It was the election of apathy, if everyone remembers the mood. No one really felt motivated to wander down to the ballot box.
The boring election campaign.
You remember it well. So I think in 3 years we've come a long way. We're now at a very polarised time. I have never in 15 years in public life, even at the height of some of those figures you were talking about, had people come up and slap me on the back and squeeze my hand in a handshake as hard as what I get today. Mind you, I've never had people come up and stick the finger in my chest and say, Julia Gillard this and that, and your 17 minutes this and that, and so it's a really polarised time, and I just don't think anyone knows, including myself, just how deep that is on both sides. But that's why we have ballots in Australia, and that's where democracy really speaks.
I want to ask you really briefly about the events of 2010, because you're on the public record a lot of times about that historic experience. I don't really want to repeat it too much, but you were part of a small bloc who were deciding who would govern Australia. It was an amazing time in the nation's politics for armchair people like me. Back home, though, my perception is that there was initially a great deal of pride in the power that you suddenly had. I remember that initially. But my perception is that for some people, it did, on a local level, I'm talking again, it did become embarrassment, particularly around that time where you mentioned your 17-minute speech when you finally announced which leader you would back. On a local level, do you agree with me? Do you believe that being in that position of national focus whilst the government hung in the balance, did that damage your reputation here?
Oh, a bit, but probably on the back of some pretty strong vested interests pushing some pretty strong points into the electorate. And there's some well-known conflict with other talkback hosts with a larger audience than yours, out of due respect, who push those messages hard, and they push them on behalf of some pretty...
Still do.
Yeah, and on behalf of some pretty significant business interests. They dress it up as, you know, the talk of the battler's friends, and that's just rot.
It's conspiracy, is it?
Well, no, they openly talk about people like John Singleton being their bosses, and, you know, they're mercenaries for them. And John Singleton openly talks about doing work on behalf of Gina Rinehart, you know, and so that's not a conspiracy. They are all on the record. It is vested interests at work.
It's very blatant,
I can't control that. And, you know, I arguably gave myself an uppercut by speaking for 17 minutes and leaving myself open to some of that. But in the end, the conscious decision I made at the time goes back to the point I made before. It's a human business, and the simple job description of trying to do the best by your electorate and your country, if that doesn't deserve a fair bit of time giving a fair explanation without, you know, people saying, oh, we want it all in 3 minutes or less, then I don't think I'm the one who needs to defend my position. I think there are a few others who need to ask, is that the type of country we want to live in, where government is decided in 3 minutes or less?
Do you regret the 17-minute speech?
I don't regret it. I think it's a lesson learnt that, and you learn lessons every day. In hindsight, you know, I would have probably spoken for less and tightened it up and placed a bit more emphasis on the significance of it, and probably given myself a bit more time leading into it. We really only made the decision at about 1 o'clock that day. So this is 2 hours later. And I'm wanting to get home after a very long election campaign locally, and then straight into that. And you basically haven't seen your wife and kids, and you want to get home and see them. So,
and apparently you were sick at the time of making the speech. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that's what you referred to before. So only that it was through that period that a lot of that only played itself out. And in fact, it was letters from people around Australia saying you are sick, you should go and see a doctor. That sent me off.
Diagnosing you.
Yeah, that's right. The large eyeballs, the shaky hands. So, but in the end, you know, it is what it is. I defend every part of the content, and that's the important part, and continue to advocate for the messages that were important in that decision, and what I was trying to take the opportunity to say that day around education, around health, around Indigenous issues, and around the importance of regional communities like ours.
I want to read you what a columnist wrote about that speech. I'm not going to labour about the speech. I'm heading somewhere else with this. He wrote, he giggled like a kid. He's referring to you. He giggled like a kid pushed onto the stage at speech night to have what he would call a conversation. What he was about to announce would be Christmas dinner conversation for decades. Oakeshott touched on all the meetings and negotiations. He could have been describing a school excursion, or better yet, his excellent adventure brought about by this accident of democracy. He sounded like a daggy bloke who is difficult to dislike, not because he's especially funny, but because he's willing to look silly in his efforts to amuse. He looked part Tony Blair, part Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was boyishly self-conscious. He made his wide smiles strung taut with strain, not unlike Steve Martin in The Jerk. I want to know, how do you cope with these really cruel attacks on your character since 2010? Like I say, Ray Hadley sniping every opportunity. You're parodied on an ABC sitcom. Generally, you're often just held up for public ridicule in mainstream media. I want to know what impact that has on you and your family.
Well, going back to where we started, you weigh up very seriously about whether you stand again, and you know, if you are going to do it, you want to make sure you got your battle suit on.
So these attacks are some of the reasons why you're reconsidering standing again for the seat of Lyne.
Mate, you've got kids, I've got kids, you know, and a very understanding wife. There are more people impacted than just the person involved, and that's written by someone I'm sure I've never met before.
It's more than a thick skin you need to cope with that. more than a thick skin, because
well,
that's above
right,
and beyond,
and that's real. Well, that's exactly why you think carefully about. You learn from it, you get through it, and in the end, you're stronger for it. But you
it's a
weigh
hard way
up
to toughen up.
Yeah, well, tell me about it. That is actually the least of what I've seen. I could throw you plenty of stuff that I received in that period, not only in the public domain but in the private domain. And there were periods where you got security outside your house, and one of the great lessons for me was. In this period, I was always incredibly optimistic about the collective wisdom of Australian people, and I didn't realise there were so many people on the fringe in Australian society, and there are.
They've come out
and
now,
I wish
haven't
they weren't, because I want to believe in a country that doesn't have such a hard fringe element in it, that does really affect the way public policy and the public square works. But they're there, and they do affect it, and they do affect the major parties as much as they do as people like myself, and it's a problem that Australia needs to face.
I've got to say, like I say, I haven't met you before, but I'm getting the sense tonight there's a sadness and a pessimism about the system, about the way politics is, and perhaps about how the public is these days. Has the optimism gone, is I suppose what I'm asking? No,
the idealism hasn't gone, and I think idealism in public life is a really important thing to have, because you've got to aspire and work to something to achieve as close to that as possible. But I'm wiser. I've seen more, and I've been through more, and it's in that I guess there is a bit of a lament that, I've reached agreements with both major parties to lift parliamentary standards, and they've both broken those. So, and I'm probably the one who gets the brunt of the blame for that. How's that work?
Yeah.
And some of that is now older, wiser, I wouldn't say sadder, but just lamenting about Australian parliamentary processes and how the Australian community relates to,
Rob,
their elected officials.
You are battered and bruised though, aren't you?
Oh yeah, but again, to go back to poetry, there is a great poem about you're only in being battered and bruised is being in the fight. That's
part of it.
It is much better to be battered and bruised and to be on your knees and sweating it out than being in the grandstands. So that means you're in the ring and having a go.
There's a view out there that Rob Oakeshott, when he threw his support behind Julia Gillard, there's a view that Rob Oakeshott...
You're going to have to start to footnote some of these views. I'm suspecting they're all yours.
I talk to people, Rob.
Right.
I'm probably in Port Macquarie more often than you these days. But there is a view that you compromised your independence. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Rob, are you still an independent?
Oh, very much so. So, and it's probably ironic that it's a coalition in opposition that is the most critical of a coalition in government, because that's essentially what's been formed to keep a parliament working. I had a choice to make. I could have said, no, I'm not going to commit to allowing a budget to pass for the next 3 years, or that I won't vote against a Prime Minister or a Minister in votes of no confidence at the start of this Parliament. We'd be back at the ballot box. We would have been back there arguably within a week if there was 3 or 4 of us who said the same thing. So the conscious decision I made, and that I agree creates a perception that I somehow gave up my independence, was to enter into a supply and confidence agreement or a negotiation with both sides. Now, the initial conversation I had, which is often lost in the dialogue, is they should work it out. It shouldn't be something that I work out on their behalf. There was 150 members of Parliament elected, and it was left to 6 members of Parliament to make a decision. In my view, what was described as the Kumbaya government idea of the Liberal National Party entering into some sort of agreement with the Labor Party, just as occurred in the UK, would have created the most stable option of all, because it wouldn't have meant it's a one-seat parliament on every single vote. They should have had the maturity and the national respect to work it out.
But they didn't.
They didn't. They sat back and said, no, we hate each other so much. You six on the crossbenchers work it out. And if you don't get it right, we're going to criticise you for 3 years. And so, of course, I'm going to, if that's the case, put up a for sale sign and say, righto, if you're going to leave it up to me to choose one or the other, I will. But with it, I'm going to chase a Port Macquarie hospital. I'm going to chase an airport. I'm going to chase, a whole range of things for this area. And I'm going to ask for some reform through the parliament as well. That's the process that happened. And I think that's incredibly independent.
As someone who lives here, I do want to know, do you think it was payday for Port Macquarie and the electorate of Lyne when you were put in that position and you were able to negotiate like that? Was it payday for all of us?
You know what? Anything that was asked for was in the system already, or in my view, anything I asked for I could comfortably justify as not being a straight-out pork barrel. So the Port Macquarie Hospital, everyone knew it had some of the highest, waiting lists in the country for a regional hospital. It was top of the Capital Works waiting list for the North Coast. That was an easy one to ask for, and I'd been asking for it anyway. Get someone from the major political parties to come in here and say the Pacific Highway doesn't matter.
You weren't asking for anything unreasonable by the Senate.
Well, and then the hospital, well, the other point is, no, I don't think I did. And the other point is, if there was any sort of win for a certain sector, it was regional Australia generally. So, it was a $1.8 billion health and hospital funding round that Port Macquarie and Kempsey hospitals were successful in, but so were 98 other regional rural hospitals in Australia, all who have achieved something out of that process, all who wouldn't have got anything if one major party had got in. It wasn't part of either side's platform. It wasn't on their agenda, and I think, God damn, it should be.
When we talk about your independence being compromised, the conjecture about that goes beyond the events of 2010, though. I mean, here on a local level, there is confusion, and I'm looking forward to you clarifying this tonight, about your relationship with Peter Beazley. There's confusion about it, Rob. I mean, people...
that we're married?
Not about that sort of relationship, but your political relationship.
Okay.
When he lost for New South Wales seat, and you've referred to this earlier, to Leslie Williams, many believe that could be traced back to his association with you. And certainly the National Party capitalised on that through their advertising. They seized on that. So can you clarify what that relationship is? Are you one entity? Are you one political party? What's the story?
We're friends.
You're friends. So
grand conspiracy.
So this National Party seizing upon
what else
your
could
relationship.
It be? What else could it be?
He's worked for you in the past.
Yeah, and look, and he's very good at what he does, and that's why I think the broader community has recognised that and voted him in as mayor.
Okay.
The point I'd make about that state election, though, is, and Pete, to his absolute credit, would never say this, and it goes to the mark of the man. But I do. We were talking about sadness and lament before, and in the end, it is what it is now. But the timing of the decision I made was incredibly unhelpful. And at the start of a state election campaign, was the announcement of the start of carbon price negotiations, which was incredibly unhelpful again. But it shouldn't have been unhelpful to him unless people associate him with you, which they that's right, which they do. They know we're friends. So
Yeah.
there's people out there who try and push that for all it's worth and build some sort of grand conspiracy. But I'm friends with people like Adrian Piccoli, who's the National Party Minister for Education, but it doesn't play to anyone's political strategy to blow that one up.
Okay.
I'm friends with Malcolm Turnbull. He's in the room next door in the Parliament, but who cares? And there's a lot of interest in Pete because we both live locally. He's done some work with me. He was the state member, and it plays to a certain strategy to try and say, I don't know, we're trying to take over their castle. I don't know.
All right, I'm going to move forward because I've taken up a lot of your time tonight. Your main opponent for the seat of Lyne is the National Party's David Gillespie. He's not afraid of taking you to task, is he?
I've got no idea.
You must have read what he said about you. I mean, he's accused you of hypocrisy, telling porkies on various issues. It just seems to get quite personal with the Nationals and you and David and you.
Well, look, I've started to switch off a bit because it's been 10 years.
You switched off to your opponent?
Yeah, it's been 10 years of the same mantra, which is I'm terrible and they're great, and they're going to abuse me out of office, and insults is the modus operandi.
All right, here's your free shot. What are the main policies? If you do stand again, what are the things that you, on a local level I'm talking here, because I know you've got a lot of national projects as well and interests, but on a local level, what are your policies? Why should people vote Rob Oakeshott back in again?
Well, there's a track record of results on a whole range of different areas, and we've talked about some of those. I think in the next Parliament, in the next period, a lot of those projects are actually going to land, so I'd like to manage them all the way through. So Port Hospital, Kempsey Hospital, I'd like to do some work on Manning Rural Referral Hospital as well. The way the preventative medicine arm, Medicare locals and hospitals work, the aged care reform that's coming through. In the education sector in 2015, we're going to have, we'll be the first location to have a full undergraduate medicine degree delivered in our location of Port Macquarie. That is a breakthrough in the way medical education's delivered. So it'd be nice to nurse that whole $20 million project through and see students actually taking up that project. Charles Sturt Uni's expanding pretty hard, and some of those course uptakings this year, so I'd really like to continue to do the work with them. The secondary education funding and the whole equity arguments and getting Catholic independent and public education working closer together has been something we've been working on, and trying to get those pathways and collaboration between local schools, secondary schools, and then TAFE and tertiary education now working, I think, is a bit of a passion. Indigenous recognition in the Constitution is going to happen in the next Parliament, hopefully, with bipartisanship. Really? Well, they're both bipartisan on an act of Parliament at the moment, and I know that's a national piece of work, but locally that means a lot. There's about 2,500 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in pretty well every community of Kempsey, Port, Taree,
sure.
And we are in many ways the home of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia, as much as we like to deny it. So I'd like to see some work, further work done in that area in a positive way. There's always a lot left to do by the sound of it. And I'll throw in the Pack Highway. I'm gutted that both sides walked away on that and the 2016 deadline, and I'd really like to see that full project completed. But that's the unfinished That's my business. Main one. Do that one for me, would you? Yeah, that's really got to happen. I've got to ask, if you choose not to run, what does that mean for Rob Oakeshott? Is that retirement? What would you do with your time? Oh no, I'm early 40s. These are supposedly earning years. I'll find something else to do. I don't know what it is. I haven't even thought about it. I'm busy doing what I'm doing, and genuinely honouring that, and weighing up next time as well in the back of my mind. I don't have room for three things. I'm a bloke. Final question then. Hypothetically, you do run again and you do win the seat of Lyne. If that remarkable situation repeats, the hung parliament, if you're again in a position where you need to support Gillard or Abbott and they can't work it out maturely, as you were saying before, and you're one of those independents who have to make the decision, who do you choose? It depends purely on policy, just as it did last time. I can guarantee you I won't speak for 17 minutes. I'll keep it under 5. That's a lesson learnt. But it'll be a policy shootout, and there isn't, in my position, there's nowhere to hide on what you stand on everything. So, it doesn't take too much digging by either side to know exactly what I stand for on most issues and what would appeal to someone like me. So if the for sale sign has to go up on behalf of this region again, they just have to do some Googling, and then work out whether it works for them. No one could accuse you of not working really hard for our local community. Thank you so much for coming on tonight, Rob. Appreciate your time, mate. Thank you. Thank you.